So, Barnaby Joyce, the former Deputy Prime Minister, has been saying some pretty strong stuff lately about two of Australia's biggest challenges, the National Disability Insurance Scheme and our fuel crisis. We're going to break down exactly what he's arguing on both fronts.
And he kicks things off with this absolute bombshell of a quote when talking about the National Disability Insurance Scheme, or NDIS. This one phrase really frames his entire perspective, that the good intentions behind the scheme are being taken for a ride.
All right, so let's dive into that first topic, the NDIS. Joyce's whole argument here is that the scheme is just completely out of control, both in terms of money and its actual purpose, and he thinks it's time for a major course correction.
He really zeroes in on this number to make his point about the cost, $65,000. He says this is the average payment for each person on the NDIS. He uses this figure to show you the sheer scale of the spending and to suggest that this money is pretty vulnerable.
And to show how this could happen, he lays out this scenario. It's a hypothetical, but it's meant to make you think. You've got an unregistered provider, right? They say one child is on the autism spectrum, and boom, that's a $65,000 payment. Then they do it again with another child. All of a sudden, you're looking at $130,000. This, he says, is exactly how the system is being exploited.
It's not just about the money, though. It's about the sheer size of the whole thing. He points out the NDIS is on track to have 1 million people in it. And that leads him to ask this really pointed question. Do we, as a country, actually have 1 million people with the kind of severe disabilities the NDIS was set up for in the first place?
And that brings us to his next big point, which is all about the scope of the NDIS. He's basically arguing that what the scheme was meant to be and what it has become are two totally different things.
Yeah, this slide really lays it all out, doesn't it? On one side, you have what he says the plan was, a safety net for people who are profoundly disabled. But on the other side, you have what he sees as the reality now, a system that covers psychosocial aspects and, as he puts it, every spectrum of autism. For him, that's the core of the issue.
And to back this up, he brings up a pretty well-known figure in Australian politics, the late Tim Fischer, a former Deputy Prime Minister who himself was on the autism spectrum. Joyce's point here is, well, if someone on the spectrum can hold one of the highest jobs in the country, does that mean they automatically need to be considered disabled and require NDIS support? Okay, but then he says something that's, well, it's designed to be explosive. He calls the situation a form of sort of public slavery. He's trying to argue that taxpayers are essentially being forced to work for others who, as he puts it, just don't want to work. It's incredibly strong language, and it's meant to make you sit up and pay attention.
All right, so switching gears completely now, Joyce moves from social policy right over to Australia's fuel security. It's a totally different issue, but you'll see he brings that same level of intensity to the debate. So before we get into his take, let's just set the scene, right? Wholesale petrol prices are climbing past $2.12 a liter, and diesel, which is just vital for our farmers and miners, is up over $3.32. These aren't just numbers, they're hitting key parts of our economy hard. This is the crisis he's talking about.
So what's causing all this? Well, if you ask Joyce, it's not what you might think. It's not the global market or supply chains. No, for him, the problem is ideological. He calls climate policy an obnoxious, profane defilement. His view is pretty clear. You can't fix fuel security until you get rid of what he sees as this damaging green ideology.
Okay, so he's pointed the finger squarely at climate policy, but he doesn't just stop there. He's got a plan. He lays out this very direct, step-by-step emergency plan to tackle Australia's fuel problems head-on.
And here it is, his 4-step emergency plan. It's pretty direct. First up, get rid of the Climate Change Department. He sees it as the biggest roadblock. Second, the government needs to step in and cover the financial risks so we can buy fuel on the open market and buy it now. Third, cut through all the bureaucracy to make sure those deals actually turn into fuel in our tanks. And finally, number 4, we need to build more fuel storage here in Australia and do it fast.
Now, about that last point, more storage. Joyce uses a really striking example to drive this home. He points out that the U.S. military keeps 300 million liters of fuel right here in Australia for its own use. He says it's frankly embarrassing that we don't have that kind of capacity for ourselves.
So let's just pull all this together. We basically got two separate arguments here from Barnaby Joyce, right? When it comes to the NDIS, it all boils down to what he calls exploitation, and a program that's lost its way. And on the fuel crisis, his fix is simple. Ditch the climate policies and get practical about securing our energy supply. And this is where we're left. What Joyce is putting on the table here is not just a small policy change. He's really questioning the very foundation of how we approach social welfare and energy in this country. So the big question is, what happens when ideas like these start getting more and more attention? What does that mean for the national conversation?